Laughter echoed and danced under the chandeliers, a sound as refined as the marble floors beneath my feet. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Tower sparkled in gold, Art Deco lights casting broken patterns over gowns, tuxedos, and champagne glasses. Each table was filled with white roses, their petals glowing like fallen stars, while the smooth notes of a jazz quartet floated through the air. It was perfect. Just the kind of event my father had always envisioned for his 60th, a celebration designed to impress the city's elite, a platform for him to shine. Yet, pressed against the glass of the 30-story windows, I felt more like an observer than a participant. The skyline stretched endlessly below, bright and unfeeling, while inside the room I lingered at the fringes of a party that seemed to belong to everyone but me. The guest list resembled a who's who of the metropolitan area's most successful individuals. Prominent lawyers, influential politicians, wealthy real estate moguls, and old money families whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. Dad was the center of attention in his custom midnight blue tuxedo. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and his confident smile reflected the pride of a man who had built an empire from scratch. At 60, Vincent DeLuca still had the kind of magnetic charm that drew other powerful men to seek his advice. And tonight, surrounded by praise and admiration from 200 of his closest friends, he was truly in his element. After 40 years in commercial real estate, he was telling a group of admirers, his voice carrying the weight that comes from sealing billion-dollar deals. And I can assure you that success isn't about luck or timing. It's about vision, execution, and surrounding yourself with people who know what it takes to create something enduring. My stepmother, Linda, stood next to him like a perfectly polished accessory, glowing in her champagne silk gown that likely cost. At 45, she possessed a beauty that needed a lot of upkeep, and every aspect of her look, from her diamond necklace to her expertly styled hair, signaled her position as the wife of one of the city's top businessmen. My older half-brother Adrian was the center of attention from Dad's right side, his voice exuding the confidence that comes from being prepared as the successor to a commercial real estate empire. At 28, he had already independently closed several significant deals, and his achievements were clear in everything from his platinum cuff links to the way other young professionals vied for his attention. The Morrison Tower project brought in $12 million in commissions this quarter, Adrian declared, casually adjusting his PC Philippe watch with ease. Sometimes I reflect on our accomplishments and realize that most people simply lack the intelligence or ambition to operate at this level. His wife Sophia nodded with enthusiasm, her designer dress and perfect makeup showcasing the lifestyle that Adrian's success afforded. Exactly. It requires a unique vision to recognize opportunities that others overlook. Not everyone can think on that scale. I continued to sip my champagne. Dom Perignon, of course, because Dad never accepted anything less than the best, letting their familiar boasts wash over me like expensive background music. They were unaware that the simple black cocktail dress I wore was custom-made by the same fashion house that dressed tech moguls and hedge fund managers, or that the understated pearl earrings I had on were worth more than Adrian's monthly salary. Speaking of vision and long-term planning, Dad's voice grew louder as he addressed the larger gathering. I want to take a moment to discuss legacy and what it means to create something significant that can be handed down through generations. The conversations around us hushed as Dad's commanding voice captured attention from across the elegant ballroom. Other guests adjusted their chairs to get a better view of the man they all admired and wished to imitate. When I founded DeLuca Properties 40 years ago, Dad continued, his voice adopting the familiar rhythm of someone used to speaking to shareholders at industry events. I committed not only to creating wealth but also to building a legacy that would last for generations. I aimed to create something my children could take pride in and build upon. Linda smiled at him with practiced affection, her expression carefully designed to show both love and pride without seeming too eager for attention. Looking at Adrian, Dad continued, his pride clear in every word. I see that vision realized. He's not merely following my path. He's broadening our influence, innovating our methods, and getting ready to elevate DeLuca Properties even further. Adrian sat up straight in his custom-made suit, clearly enjoying the public recognition of his accomplishments. Sophia held his hand, her face glowing with the joy that comes from being married to the family's star. Then Dad's eyes found me across the busy ballroom, and I felt the familiar burden of his disappointment settling over the celebration like an expensive but heavy blanket. "And then there's Olivia," he said, his tone changing slightly but unmistakably, the warmth fading from his voice like wine spilling from a shattered glass. "My biological daughter, who at 26 continues to let me down with her lack of direction and her total failure to grasp what it means to be a DeLuca." The words sliced through the elegant atmosphere like a knife through silk, sharp and impossible to overlook. I could sense 200 pairs of eyes turning toward me, some sympathetic, others inquisitive. A few were likely relieved that their own family disappointments weren't being exposed so publicly at such a prestigious gathering. "Olivia refuses to be part of the family business," Dad continued, his voice resonating across the ballroom with the authority that made him one of the city's most esteemed businessmen. "She lives in a small apartment downtown, drives an older car than some of our junior employees, and works on what she refers to as investment projects that no one here would view as serious business endeavors." I could hear the soft hum of conversations beginning around the room as guests absorbed this surprising shift in what was meant to be a celebration. Linda's face stayed perfectly calm, but I noticed a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. She has always relished these moments when Dad's disappointment in me became public. "I've given her every chance," Dad continued, seemingly determined to make his disappointment the highlight of the evening's entertainment. "Entry-level jobs at the company, introductions to serious professionals, even funding for real business projects. But she insists on chasing these unrealistic projects that will never lead to anything substantial." Adrian nodded in approval, clearly enjoying his position as the successful son in contrast to my perceived failures. "The real estate sector demands vision, capital, and professional connections," he added, his voice loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. "It's not something you can just dabble in as a pastime." I set my champagne flute down and walked calmly toward the family table, my heels softly clicking against the marble floor. The conversations around us quieted as people sensed that something important was about to unfold. "Dad," I said softly, my voice clear in the sudden silence, "I think there may be some confusion regarding my work." He turned to me with the kind of look that successful men reserve for interruptions they find unwelcome. "Olivia, please don't further embarrass yourself by trying to justify whatever it is you believe you've achieved. This is my birthday celebration, and I won't let your delusions of success ruin it." I calmly replied that I wasn't here to disrupt anything. "I just thought you might want to know that your daughter has been more successful than you think." Dad laughed sharply, dismissing me. His laughter echoed across the ballroom like shattered glass. "Success? Olivia, you live in a small apartment and drive a Honda that should have been junked long ago. That's not success, that's just getting by." The group of guests around us grew larger, attracted by our family's public drama. I noticed several well-known business figures in the crowd, including some whose names I recognized from the Forbes list of the city's top entrepreneurs. "Actually," I said, taking my phone out of my purse, "I believe there might be some misunderstanding about my living situation and business endeavors." Dad's face changed from annoyance to near anger. "Olivia, I will not stand here at my own birthday party and listen to more of your dreams about being a successful businesswoman. You're embarrassing yourself in front of the whole family." That's when he made a decision that would alter everything. "Security!" Dad shouted, his voice echoing through the elegant ballroom and capturing the attention of every guest present. "Security, get my daughter out of this event. She's ruining the celebration, and I want her removed from the building right now." The room went completely silent, except for the soft jazz music that continued to play, seemingly unaware of the dramatic shift in the evening. 200 of the city's most influential people watched as a uniformed security guard approached our table. His face was professional, but he clearly felt uneasy about the family drama he was being asked to handle. The security guard, a tall and well-dressed man who seemed experienced with high-end events, approached me with measured and polite steps. However, as he neared, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to confusion. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, stopping just before our table and speaking loudly enough for the silent ballroom to hear. "Are you Miss Olivia DeLuca?" "I am," I answered calmly. The guard's demeanor changed entirely, his professional air replaced by what seemed like respect. "Ma'am, I apologize for the mix-up," but you are the building owner. You are listed as the main contact for all security issues in the Metropolitan Tower. The ensuing silence was so profound that I could hear the faint hum of the building's climate control. I noticed the soft rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats and the quiet sound of champagne bubbles rising in crystal glasses. Dad's expression transformed from confidence to confusion, then to something resembling horror in just 3 seconds. "What did you just say?" The security guard glanced around the room, realizing he had shared news that was more impactful than he expected. "Sir, Miss DeLuca owns the Metropolitan Tower. She bought the building 18 months ago through her investment firm, Meridian Holdings." "That's impossible," Dad whispered, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the ballroom. I took out my phone and opened the property management app that oversaw all aspects of the building's operations. "Actually, Dad, it's true. I purchased the Metropolitan Tower for $247 million in cash 18 months ago when the previous owners were on the brink of bankruptcy." The figure lingered in the air like a revelation. $247 million, a sum greater than what most people in this room would earn in their lifetimes, and I had spent it all in a single real estate deal. "The Metropolitan Tower is included in my commercial real estate portfolio," I said, showing Dad the screen with my property holdings. "I own 12 commercial buildings throughout the city, including 3 properties managed by DeLuca Properties for other investors." Adrian was fixated on my phone screen. His earlier confidence had vanished. "That shows a portfolio valued at over $400 million. $437 million to be exact," I clarified, "but that's just the real estate assets. The total investment portfolio is a bit larger." Linda had turned completely pale, her makeup failing to conceal the shock on her face. "How is this possible? You're only 26. "I started investing at 18, I explained, addressing the whole ballroom since everyone was clearly listening. "Anyway, I began with the trust fund Grandma DeLuca left me, $2 million that I used to purchase my first property downtown. I've been expanding the portfolio ever since, reinvesting all profits and using my existing holdings to buy larger properties." Dad finally spoke, though his voice was rough with disbelief. "You bought the Metropolitan Tower, this building, among others," I answered. "I also own the Harrison Center where your main offices are, the Riverside complex where Adrian and Sophia live, and the waterfront towers where Linda's spa is located." The weight of that revelation started to settle in around the room. My family, who had been dismissing my success for years, were essentially my tenants. They lived and worked in buildings that I owned. The security guard, realizing he was witnessing something remarkable, cleared his throat politely. "Ma'am, should I escort anyone from the building, or is everything settled?" I scanned the silent ballroom filled with 200 guests who had just witnessed one of the most dramatic shifts in expectations they had likely ever experienced. Then I looked back at my family's shocked expressions. "Actually," I said, smiling at the security guard, "I think we're okay, but could you please ask the building manager to come up here? I want to talk about some policy changes with my family." "Of course, ma'am." "Right away," the security guard replied as he walked away. The quiet in the ballroom slowly turned into murmurs and the soft sounds of people taking out their phones, likely to check what they had just heard or to share the story with those who weren't lucky enough to see it live. Dad sank heavily into his chair, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Olivia, I don't get it. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think I was a failure?" I replied softly, "Because every time I tried to discuss my investments, you interrupted me to explain that real estate needed serious money and professional connections. When I mentioned buying my first property, you said I was wasting my inheritance. When I talked about growing my portfolio, you said I was in over my head." I took out another document from my purse, the building management report showing the monthly income from all my properties. Eventually, I decided to let my results do the talking. The building manager, a distinguished woman in her 50s, came to our table with the kind of presence that successful property owners always have. "Miss DeLuca, you wanted to see me?" "Yes, Sandra. I wanted to introduce you to my family. They are tenants in several of our buildings, and I think it's important for them to understand our building policies and rental agreements. Sandra smiled professionally. Of course. Is there anything specific you want me to go over with them? Just the standard lease terms and our policy on events like this. Also, please ensure they have my direct contact information in case they need anything. As Sandra started to explain the building's rules to my shocked family, I saw that the conversations in the ballroom had picked up again, but with a different vibe. People came to our table, introduced themselves, and inquired about investment chances. Mrs. Harrington from the City Planning Commission reached out her hand with clear respect. Miss DeLuca, I had no idea you were the investor behind the downtown revitalization projects. Your efforts have changed entire neighborhoods. Dr. Morrison from the Medical Center Board was right behind her. The medical plaza you created has been truly transformative for our practice. We would love to talk about extending our lease. However, the most important conversation happened when Dad pulled me aside as the night was coming to a close. Olivia, he said softly, his tone lacking the authority he had earlier. I owe you an apology. More than just an apology. I have been completely mistaken about what you have achieved. I know, I replied, giving him a long overdue hug. But maybe now we can start fresh. As equals. Dad looked around the classy ballroom. My ballroom in the building I owned. Sweetheart, I think you might be a step ahead of your old man at this point. Adrian joined us, his previous arrogance replaced by what seemed like real respect. Olivia, I need to ask. Would you think about letting me collaborate with you? Because what you have built is exactly what I have been trying to learn how to do. Of course, I said, taking out my business card. But you should know that my junior analysts start at entry-level positions, no matter their last name. Adrian took the card with clear relief. That sounds great. I believe I have a lot to learn. As the celebration came to a close and guests began to depart, many stopped to thank me for hosting such a memorable evening in such a lovely venue, and several business cards were exchanged. I discovered 3 new potential investment opportunities. However, the most significant moment occurred when Dad stood up to give a final toast. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared, his voice resonating throughout the ballroom one last time, I need to correct something I mentioned earlier tonight. The room fell silent. Everyone's attention was on the man who had been the center of the evening until his daughter subtly showed that success can take many forms. I said that Olivia had let me down with her lack of direction and achievement. Dad went on, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. I was mistaken. She hasn't let me down. She's impressed me. While I was building a business, she was constructing an empire. He lifted his glass toward me, his face reflecting both pride and a humility I had never witnessed from him before. To Olivia DeLuca, property mogul, and the daughter who taught her father that sometimes the student becomes the teacher. The applause that followed was heartfelt and enthusiastic. As I stood to acknowledge it, I realized that sometimes the best way to get back at people who doubt your potential isn't just to prove them wrong. Sometimes it's about demonstrating that love and respect can change any relationship, even if it takes owning the building to grab their attention. The following morning, 3 major developers reached out to discuss partnership opportunities. Dad assisted me in arranging the meetings.